Have you ever stopped to think about how ancient religious rules fit into our crazy, fast-paced modern lives? Today we're going to dive into a really fascinating question that sits right at the intersection of faith and technology. We're talking about the Islamic provision for shortening prayers when you travel. It's a rule that comes from the age of camel caravans that's now meeting the age of the daily commute. So, let's get into it.
Welcome to Wisdom Time.
All right, let's kick things off with a problem that is, well, super modern. It's something millions of us can probably relate to every single day. Okay, so picture this. Your daily commute to work is more than 90 kilometers. That's about 56 miles. Now, according to a rule that's been around for centuries, that distance could technically make you a traveler. So does that mean you should be shortening your prayers every single workday? This isn't just some abstract question, right? It's a real-world dilemma for a ton of people.
This whole puzzle gets right to the heart of a concept called safralik. That's basically the set of Islamic rules for when you're on a journey. And the most famous of these rules is the permission to shorten certain prayers. But here's the catch. This was a provision designed for a world of real hardship and long, difficult journeys. And now we're trying to figure out how it applies to our world of convenience and speed.
So to even begin to solve our modern problem, we've got to go back, way back. We need to look at the source, the original permission itself.
The original permission comes straight from the Qur'an. It says, "There is no blame on you for shortening the prayer when you travel." But then there's this really crucial condition at the end. If you fear. So what does that really mean? Does this mean you can only shorten prayers if you're actually in danger? Well, Islamic scholars really dug into this. They reasoned that while fear was a very common hardship during travel back then, it wasn't the only one. The permission, they argued, was tied to the journey itself, not just the feeling of fear. And the clearest answer comes from the life of the Prophet Muhammad himself. You see, most of his journeys did involve the potential for conflict. But there was one huge exception, his final pilgrimage, the farewell Hajj. That journey was undertaken in total peace, and yet he still shortened his prayers. This set a clear precedent that the permission wasn't just for wartime situations.
And this precedent led to a key legal question. Is shortening the prayer a choice, or is it a command? Most schools of thought view it as a rukhsah. Think of it like a divine allowance that you can choose to use. But the very influential Hanafi school sees it as a wujub, an obligation that you should follow once you're considered a traveler.
Okay, so travelers can shorten prayers, but that just blows open the biggest question of all. What is a traveler? How far do you have to go? This is where the story gets really interesting, because early scholars basically had to become detectives trying to piece together a clear, measurable rule from the source texts.
Their process was absolutely fascinating. They analyzed all these accounts of the Prophet's journeys between cities they knew, and they had a light bulb moment. They realized the common factor wasn't distance, it was time. So they established a standard journey time, what an average person could cover by camel or on foot. Then, they just converted that time into a fixed, easy-to-measure distance.
Now, depending on which texts they prioritized, different scholars landed on slightly different standards. The Hanafi school, for example, calculated a 3-day journey as the benchmark. The other major schools used a 2-day journey. And this small difference in the starting point is why you still hear about different distances today. And the result of the Hanafi school's 3-day calculation became the most widely known standard, a journey of approximately 90 kilometers. For centuries, that single number made the rules simple and crystal clear for everyone.
And for a very long time, this system worked perfectly. But then came the steam engine, and the car, and the airplane. And this is exactly where that nice, clear, simple rule started to get, well, pretty complicated.
Just look at this comparison. A 90-kilometer journey in the past meant days of difficult, uncertain, and exhausting travel. Today, you can cover that same 90 kilometers in an hour, sitting in a comfortable air-conditioned car or train. The distance is the same, but the experience is from a completely different planet.
This, of course, led to a critical new question. The whole permission was meant as a mercy to ease the hardship of travel. So if technology completely removes the hardship, does the permission still apply? This became the absolute center of the modern debate. In response, some modern scholars proposed a new way of thinking about it. They said, let's go back to the original logic, time and effort.
They figured if a 90-kilometer journey on foot took about 18 hours of walking, then maybe the real definition of a traveler isn't someone who covers 90 kilometers, but someone who travels for 18 hours no matter how far they go.
But there's a powerful counterargument to that. It says the permission is tied to the act of travel itself, not the hardship. And the proof is simple. A very sick person endures incredible hardship at home, but they don't shorten their prayers. This really suggests the trigger for the rule isn't hardship, but simply being on a journey.
So, where does all this leave you, the modern traveler? We've got an ancient rule, a modern reality, and several completely valid interpretations. So let's break down the 3 main approaches you can take today. Now, before we get to the final verdict, if you're finding this explainer helpful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and turn on the notification bell. All right, so each of these approaches is based on a different way of interpreting the very same principles we've been talking about.
The key thing to know is there's no single universally agreed upon answer. Instead, there are 3 valid ways to approach this. First, you can stick with the classical 90-kilometer rule. This prioritizes tradition and clarity. Second, you could adopt the modern 18-hour rule, focusing on the original spirit of what it means to endure a long effort. Or third, you could go back to the most originalist view and consider yourself a traveler only on a journey that actually lasts for multiple days.
Ultimately, this whole topic is open to scholarly interpretation, a process known as ijtihad. By understanding the logic behind each of these views, you are empowered to make an informed choice for yourself based on the reasoning that you find most sound for your own circumstances.
And this all leaves us with a final thought. This entire discussion is really a case study for a much larger question. In a world that is changing faster than ever, how do we balance the wisdom of our traditions with the realities of modern life? It's a huge question and definitely one worth thinking about. Thanks so much for joining us.